At my daughter's birthday lunch, she toasted, "To the woman who raised me, but now needs a corner in a nursing home." I stayed silent, and the next day, I froze the mortgage. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The crystal glasses clinked as my daughter Raven raised her flute of champagne, her ruby-red nails gleaming under the chandelier lights. I smiled with anticipation, smoothing the wrinkles of my navy dress, the one I had splurged on just for her 46th birthday celebration. The dining room buzzed with the excited chatter of her friends, colleagues, and my grandchildren seated around the large mahogany table. "I'd like to make a toast," Raven announced, her voice cutting through the conversations. The room fell silent. "To my mother, Lillian." She gestured toward me with her glass, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "To the woman who raised me, but now needs a little corner in a nursing home." The words struck me like a physical blow. My smile froze as I sat there, champagne glass suspended mid-air, unable to move. A few awkward chuckles rippled through the room, but most guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes darting between Raven and me. "Mom's getting up there in years," Raven continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension she'd created. "Aren't you, Mom? We've been looking at some really nice facilities." I lowered my glass to the table, my hand trembling slightly. "I'm only 70, Raven," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "And my health is fine." "Of course it is, Mom," she replied with a dismissive wave. "But it's better to be prepared, right? You can't live in that big house forever." That big house, my home, the one I'd worked 2 jobs to maintain after her father passed away. The same house where I'd raised her, where I still kept her childhood drawings and report cards in boxes in the attic. Mason, Raven's husband, cleared his throat and quickly raised his glass. "To family," he said, clearly trying to redirect the conversation. Everyone hastily joined in, relieved for the interruption. The dinner continued, but I barely touched my food. My mind kept replaying Raven's words, searching for some hidden joke I might have missed. But there was no mistaking the intention behind them. As I helped clear the plates, despite Raven's insistence that I should take it easy, I noticed a folder on the counter. It was partially open, and the words "Golden Sunset Retirement Community" were clearly visible on the brochure inside. My stomach clenched. Later, as I was putting on my coat to leave, my 14-year-old grandson Tyler approached me, his shoulders hunched. "I'm sorry about Mom," he whispered. "She shouldn't have said that." I cupped his cheek with my hand. "It's okay, sweetheart." "No, it's not," he insisted. "She talks about your house all the time. She told Dad they could sell it once you're—" He trailed off, looking guilty. "Once I'm what, Tyler?" "Once you're in a home," he mumbled. "They want to use the money to expand the business." I felt the blood drain from my face. The house, my house, that I had refinanced years ago to help Raven and Mason buy this very home we were standing in. The mortgage was still in my name because they had convinced me it was better for tax purposes. I had been making the payments all these years, believing I was helping my daughter build a stable life. "Grandma, are you okay?" Tyler asked, concern etching his young face. I patted his arm reassuringly. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Don't worry about me." On the drive home, memories flooded back. Raven as a little girl, pigtails bouncing as she ran through the sprinklers in our backyard. Teaching her to bake cookies in our kitchen, helping her with college applications at the dining room table. The pride I felt at her graduation. Where had that daughter gone? I thought of all the weekends I'd spent watching the grandchildren, so Raven and Mason could focus on their careers, the dinners I'd cooked, the laundry I'd done, the school pickups I'd handled, all while they built their luxury lifestyle. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd served Raven countless meals and pulled out the mortgage documents for her house. My house, technically. The house that, according to my grandson, they were planning to sell once they'd tucked me away in some facility. No, I whispered to my empty kitchen. Not this time. The next morning, I put on my best dress and pearls, the ones I'd worn to Raven's wedding, and drove to the bank. The young manager looked confused when I explained what I wanted to do. "You're sure about this, Mrs. Walker?" he asked, peering at me over his glasses. "This is quite a significant decision." "I've never been more certain," I replied, my voice steady for the first time since Raven's toast. As I signed the papers to freeze the mortgage, preventing any refinancing or sale without my explicit consent, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the quiet strength of standing up for myself. What I didn't know then was that my simple signature would unravel years of carefully laid plans. Plans made by my daughter and son-in-law that had never included my well-being or wishes. And what Raven didn't know was that her cruel toast had awakened something in me that had been dormant for far too long, my sense of self-worth. The bank parking lot was nearly empty when I pulled in the next morning. I'd barely slept, but there was a strange clarity in my exhaustion, as if the fog I'd been living in for years had finally lifted. "Mrs. Walker." The branch manager, Mr. Phillips, greeted me with surprise. "Twice in 2 days. Is everything all right?" "Not exactly," I replied, clutching my purse tightly. "I need to check something about the mortgage." He led me to his office, a small room with diplomas on the wall and family photos on his desk. I noticed a picture of an elderly woman, his mother, perhaps, displayed prominently. "What can I help you with?" he asked. "I'd like to see if there have been any recent inquiries about refinancing the property," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Mr. Phillips typed something into his computer, then frowned. "Yes, actually, there was an application, submitted just yesterday around noon." My heart sank. While I had been preparing for Raven's birthday dinner, carefully wrapping the expensive painting I'd bought her, she and Mason had been trying to refinance the house, my house, without even telling me. "Is that unusual?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Well," he hesitated, "since you're the sole owner on the mortgage, they can't refinance without your signature. But they were inquiring about options." "What kind of options?" "Adding their names to the deed primarily, with your signature, of course." He tilted his head. "You didn't know about this?" I shook my head slowly. No, I didn't. The drive home felt surreal. I kept thinking about all the times Raven had casually mentioned that I should simplify my finances, or let them handle the paperwork. Each suggestion now took on a sinister meaning. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Raven's sleek black SUV already parked there. I took a deep breath before going inside. "Mom!" Raven called from my kitchen. "Where have you been? I've been calling you all morning." I found her sitting at my kitchen table, papers spread out in front of her, typing furiously on her laptop. She didn't look up as I entered. "I went to the bank," I said simply. Her fingers paused over the keyboard. "The bank? Why?" "I was curious about some transactions." Raven finally looked up, her expression shifting from annoyance to something more calculated. "What transactions?" "The mortgage, for one, and also to check my accounts." She laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Why would you need to do that? I told you I'd handle all that boring stuff." "Yes, you did," I agreed, setting my purse on the counter. "But I decided I should understand my own finances better." Something flickered across her face, worry maybe, or irritation, before she smoothed her features into a practiced smile. "Mom, you don't need to stress about money at your age. That's what Mason and I are here for." "At my age," I repeated, the phrase from her toast echoing in my mind. "Yes, well, apparently at my age I still have some decisions to make." Raven frowned. "What does that mean?" It means I froze the mortgage yesterday. And today, I found out you and Mason tried to refinance it without telling me. Her face went pale, then quickly flushed with anger. You did what? I protected my home, I said calmly. The one you and Mason were planning to sell once you put me in a nursing home. Who told you that? She demanded, standing up. Was it Tyler? That boy misunderstands everything. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her designer clothes, her perfectly manicured nails, her expertly highlighted hair, all the trappings of the success I had helped her achieve. I remembered how hard I had worked after her father died, taking extra shifts at the hospital, skipping, vacations and new clothes for myself to make sure she had everything she needed. Tyler didn't misunderstand the brochures for Golden Sunset Retirement Community that you left out yesterday, I said. Or your toast. Raven made a dismissive gesture. It was just a joke, Mom. You're being way too sensitive. Am I? I walked over to the table and looked down at the paper she'd been reviewing. Loan applications, with my name already filled in. Were you planning to forge my signature on these? She quickly gathered the papers. Of course not. I was just preparing. Everything so you wouldn't have to deal with the details. The details of a loan I know nothing about? I asked. For what? Another expansion of Mason's business? Her silence confirmed my suspicion. Raven, I said, suddenly feeling very tired. Why didn't you just ask me? Because. She hesitated, then her expression hardened. Because you make everything so difficult. You'd want to know every little detail, ask a million questions. It's exhausting. The words stung, but I kept my voice level. It's my house, Raven. My name on the mortgage. My responsibility. A responsibility you're clearly too old to handle. Properly, she snapped. Mom, be realistic. You need help managing your affairs. You're not getting any younger. I'm 70, not incapacitated, I replied. And I'm certainly not ready for Golden Sunset. Raven sighed dramatically. We were just exploring options, planning ahead. Without including me in those plans. She stood, gathering her papers. I can see you're determined to be difficult about this. Fine, but don't come crying to me when maintaining this big house becomes too much for you. As she stuffed papers into her expensive leather briefcase, a small notebook fell to the floor. I picked it up, intending to hand it back to her, when a familiar address caught my eye. This is my parents' old house, I said, staring at the notebook. The one in Maine. Raven snatched it from my hand. It's nothing. Just some properties we're looking at. Properties you're looking at? That house belongs to me, Raven. I've been renting it out for years. She wouldn't meet my eyes. It's a wasted asset, Mom. Just sitting there with those same tenants paying below market rent. My parents' house. The place where I grew up, with its wraparound porch and view of the sea. The house I'd kept as a connection to my past, renting it to a lovely retired couple at a reasonable rate because they took such good care of the garden my mother had loved. You were planning to sell that too. It wasn't a question. Mason found a developer who would pay triple what it's worth, Raven said, a hint of defiance in her voice. It's just sitting there, doing nothing for anyone. I felt something break inside me, not in a destructive way, but like ice cracking in spring. A necessary fracture that let light through. I think you should leave now, I said quietly. Raven stared at me, clearly unused to hearing no from me. Mom, you're overreacting. No, I replied. For the first time in years, I'm seeing things clearly. Please go. After she left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, looking at old photographs. The young mother I had been, the child Raven had been, the life I thought we had shared. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being her mother and had become merely a resource to be used and eventually discarded. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in years. Elisa. My childhood friend from Maine, the only person who had warned me about Raven's true nature years ago. warnings I had dismissed as jealousy. It was time to reconnect with the past I had preserved but never revisited. It was time to remember who I was before I became just Raven's mother. As I dialed her number, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't experienced in a very long time: freedom. Elisa's voice on the phone was exactly as I remembered it. Warm, with a slight Maine accent that had never quite faded despite her years away. "Lillian Walker? My goodness, it's been years," she exclaimed. "How are you, dear?" "I've been better," I admitted, settling into my armchair by the window. "Elisa, I think I need to come home for a while." There was a brief pause. "Home? You mean back to Maine?" "Yes. The house. My parents' house. I need to see it." "Oh, Lil," she said softly, using my childhood nickname. "What's happened?" I hadn't planned to tell her everything, but once I started, the words wouldn't stop. The birthday toast, the nursing home brochures, the frozen mortgage, and the plans to sell my childhood home. By the end, my voice was trembling. "I always knew that girl was trouble," Elisa said, her tone gentle but firm. "Even when she was young, there was something calculating about her." "She's my daughter," I said automatically, the defensive response ingrained after decades. "Yes, and you've been a wonderful mother. But Lil, when did you last do something for yourself?" The question caught me off guard. I don't know." "Then it's high time you did. The Coopers still live in your parents' house, and they keep it beautiful. There's a small guest cottage on the property they've fixed up. You could stay there while you figure things out." The idea of returning to Maine, to the coastal town where I grew up, sent an unexpected thrill through me. "I'll think about it," I promised. 2 days later, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Mason stood there, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. "Lillian," he began without preamble, "we need to talk." I stepped aside to let him in, noting the tension in his shoulders. "Raven's not with you?" "No, she's upset. She thinks you don't trust her." I led him to the living room and gestured for him to sit. "I wonder why that might be?" Mason ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd never seen from him before. "Look, I know Raven's toast was inappropriate. She was trying to be funny, but it came out wrong. And the nursing home brochures, the loan applications, the plans to sell my parents' house in Maine, were those just jokes too?" He winced. "It wasn't like that. We were just exploring options. Options that involved making decisions about my life and property without consulting me." Mason leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Lillian, I'm going. To be straight with you, the business is in trouble. We've overextended, and we need capital fast." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that we could lose everything if we don't secure financing soon." "And you thought the solution was to put me in a home and sell my properties?" He at least had the decency to look ashamed. "It wasn't supposed to happen right away. We just needed the assets as collateral for loans." "My assets," I clarified. "The home I've lived in for 40 years and the house my parents left to me." "Yes," he admitted, "but it was going to benefit all of us in the long run." "All of us? Or just you and Raven?" Before Mason could answer, the front door burst open and Raven stormed in, her face flushed with anger. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, glaring at her husband. "I told you I'd handle this." "Your husband was just explaining how you plan to use my homes as collateral for your failing business," I said calmly. Raven's eyes flashed. "It's not failing. We're just going through a rough patch. A rough patch that apparently requires sacrificing your mother's security." "Don't be so dramatic," Raven snapped. "We weren't going to leave you homeless. Golden Sunset is a perfectly nice facility." "That I have no interest in living in," I replied. "Well, you can't stay here forever. This house is too big for one person. It's impractical." "It's my home, Raven." She threw up her hands in exasperation. God, why are you being so selfish? After everything we've done for you. The room went silent. Mason looked uncomfortable, and even Raven seemed to realize she'd crossed a line. What exactly have you done? For me, Raven? I asked quietly. She faltered. We include you in family events. We let you watch the kids. Let me, I repeated. You mean when you need free childcare? That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to talk, or came over without needing something? Raven's expression hardened. I don't have time for this. Mom, you need to be reasonable. We're family. Family, I said, the word tasting bitter. Is that what we are? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like I'm just a convenience to you, an ATM and a babysitter rolled into one. How dare you? Raven's voice rose. After everything I've put up with, your constant meddling, your outdated opinions, your endless neediness. I felt as if I'd been slapped. Neediness? Yes. Always wanting to be involved, asking questions about our finances, offering unwanted advice. It's exhausting. In that moment, I saw my daughter clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as the little girl I'd raised, but as the woman she'd become. Someone who saw my love as an intrusion and my concern as interference. I think you should both leave, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Not until you agree to unfreeze the mortgage, Raven insisted. That's not going to happen. Mason stood up, placing a restraining hand on Raven's arm. Let's go. This isn't helping, she shook him off. No, I'm not leaving until she fixes this. There's nothing to fix, Raven, I said. The mortgage stays frozen, and I'm not signing any loan documents. Then what about the Maine house? She demanded. You don't even live there. You're just being spiteful. Actually, I said, surprising even myself, I'm going back to Maine. I'm going to stay in my parents' house for a while. Raven's face contorted with disbelief. You're what? You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. And what about the kids? Your responsibilities here? The same responsibilities you were so eager to relieve me of by putting me in Golden Sunset? Mason tugged at Raven's arm more insistently. Let's go. Now. As they headed for the door, Raven turned back, her expression cold. This isn't over, Mom. You're making a huge mistake. After they left, I sat in the sudden silence of my house, feeling strangely empty. The confrontation had revealed the truth I'd been avoiding for years. The relationship I thought I had with my daughter was an illusion, built on what I could provide rather than who I was. I picked up my phone and dialed Elisa's number again. I've decided, I told her when she answered. I'm coming to Maine. Her warm chuckle came through the line. I'll tell the Coopers to air out the cottage. When will you arrive? Soon, I said, looking around at the house filled with memories. Very soon. As I hung up, I felt something shift inside me, a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. Raven was right about one thing. This wasn't over, but it wasn't going to end the way she expected. For the first time in decades, I was going to write my own story. The drive to Maine took 2 days. I could have done it faster, but I found myself stopping frequently at roadside diners I would have once rushed past, at scenic overlooks I would have photographed quickly before hurrying back to the car. This time, I lingered, savoring cups of coffee at counters where waitresses called me honey, and watching the sun set over mountains I'd forgotten existed between my life and my past. When I finally turned onto the familiar coastal road leading to my childhood home, my heart quickened. The old Victorian appeared around the bend, its blue-gray paint weathered but well-maintained, the white trim crisp against the darkening sky. The massive oak tree still dominated the front yard, though it seemed even larger than I remembered. Before I could even park, A slender woman with silver-streaked hair emerged from the front door, waving enthusiastically. Elisa, looking remarkably unchanged despite the decades, her smile as warm as ever. "Lillian Walker," she called as I stepped out of the car. "Welcome home." She pulled me into a tight hug, smelling of lavender and sea salt. "Look at you," she said, holding me at arm's length. "Still as elegant as ever." I laughed, suddenly aware of how long it had been since I'd truly laughed. "And you haven't changed a bit." "Liar," she said with a wink. "Come meet the Coopers. They're beside themselves with excitement." The Coopers, Robert and Catherine, were a gentle couple in their early 70s who had been renting my parents' house for nearly 15 years. They greeted me with the warmth of old friends rather than the awkwardness of tenants meeting their landlord. "We've kept everything just as your mother would have wanted," Catherine assured me, leading me through the house. The gardens especially. The interior had been updated in subtle ways. New appliances in the kitchen, fresh paint on the walls. But the bones of the house remained unchanged. My father's built-in bookshelves still lined the living room. The window seat where I'd spent countless hours reading as a girl still overlooked the garden. "And here's the cottage," Robert said, leading me down a stone path to what had once been my father's workshop. "We fixed it up as a guest house a few years back. Hope you don't mind." Mind? The transformation was breathtaking. The rustic wooden structure had been lovingly restored, with gleaming windows and a small covered porch. Inside, a cozy living area flowed into a compact kitchen, with a bedroom and bathroom tucked behind. "It's perfect," I whispered, running, my hand along the smooth countertop. That night, after a dinner where conversation flowed as easily as the wine, I sat on the cottage's porch watching the stars emerge over the ocean. Elisa joined me, settling into the adjacent rocking chair with a contented sigh. "So," she said after a comfortable silence, "are you going to tell me what really drove you back here after all these years?" I took a deep breath, inhaling the salt air. "I think I lost myself, Elisa. Somewhere between being a widow and trying to be everything for Raven, I forgot who I was." She nodded, her rocker creaking gently. "You always did put others first, even when we were girls. Remember how you used to tell me I was too nice for my own good?" "I was right," she said, without a trace of smugness. "Especially about that daughter of yours." I felt the familiar urge to defend Raven, but for once I didn't. "You saw what I couldn't. Or wouldn't," Elisa corrected gently. "You wanted so badly to be the perfect mother that you couldn't see when she was taking advantage. I thought if I just gave enough, she'd—" I trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Love you more?" Elisa suggested. "Appreciate you? Become a better person?" Tears pricked at my eyes. "All of the above, I suppose." Elisa reached over and took my hand. "Love doesn't work that way, Lil. It can't be bought with sacrifices or earned through suffering." "I know that now," I said quietly. "But what do I do with the rest of my life? I'm 70 years old, Elisa. It feels too late to start over." She snorted. "Too late? My God, woman, you sound ancient. We're not in the grave yet." Despite myself, I laughed. "No, I suppose we're not. Besides," she continued, "you have something most people our age would kill for." "What's that?" "Freedom." She squeezed my hand. "Real, honest-to-God freedom. No obligations, no one depending on you, and if I'm not mistaken, a pretty solid financial foundation." I thought about my house back home, the investments I'd carefully maintained despite Raven's attempts to help, and the rental income from this very property. "You're right," I admitted. "I am in a good position." "So the question isn't what you're going to do with the rest of your life," Elisa said with a smile. "It's what you're going to do first." The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through. the cottage windows and the distant sound of waves against the shore. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be. No one expecting me to show up with a home-cooked meal or to babysit at a moment's notice. After breakfast, Catherine invited me to join her in the garden. We spent the morning with our hands in the earth, weeding and pruning the beds my mother had designed decades ago. "Your mother was quite the plantswoman," Catherine observed as we worked. "These peonies must be 50 years old, and they still bloom magnificently." I remembered my mother in her wide-brimmed hat, teaching me the names of flowers, showing me how to deadhead roses and divide perennials. "She loved this garden more than anything," I said, "except maybe my father." They sound like wonderful people. They were. I sat back on my heels, wiping sweat from my brow. They would have hated seeing what happened between Raven and me. Catherine's eyes were kind but direct. "What will you do about her?" I sighed. "I don't know yet. Part of me wants to cut ties completely. But she's still my daughter." "And your grandchildren?" "That's the hardest part," I admitted. "I adore them. Especially Tyler. He's the one who warned me about their plans." "Children often see more clearly than we give them credit for," Catherine said wisely. That afternoon, I found a box of old photographs in the attic, pictures I hadn't seen in decades. There I was as a young woman, standing proudly in front of my nursing school. Another showed me with my late husband on our wedding day, both of us laughing at some forgotten joke. And then Raven as a baby, a toddler, a serious-faced teenager. Among the photos, I found my mother's old journal, its leather cover soft with age. I opened it carefully, recognizing her elegant handwriting. "The greatest gift we can give our children is not protection from the world, its disappointments and sorrows, but the confident strength to face it on their own terms." I traced the words with my finger, feeling as if my mother were speaking directly to me across the years. Had I given Raven that gift? Or had I shielded her so thoroughly that she never developed the strength of character needed to face life's challenges honestly? My phone buzzed. Tyler's name appeared on the screen. "Grandma?" His voice was hushed, as if he were trying not to be overheard. "Mom's really mad. Dad said their business might go bankrupt and she's blaming you." My heart sank. "I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, sweetheart. Are you really in Maine?" he asked, curiosity overcoming his worry. "Yes, at my parents' old house. It's beautiful here." I wish I could see it. An idea began to form, tentative at first, then growing stronger. "Maybe you can," I said. "When's your school break?" "In 2 weeks," he replied. "But Mom would never let me come." "Let me worry about that," I told him. "Would you want to visit if you could?" "Are you kidding? That would be awesome." After we hung up, I sat for a long time with my mother's journal in my lap, thinking about strength and protection, about letting go and holding on. I hadn't returned to Maine just to escape Raven. I had come back to rediscover myself. And perhaps, in doing so, I could become the grandmother, and even the mother, I was meant to be, rather than the one I had allowed myself to become. My phone buzzed again, a text from Raven. "We need to talk. This has gone far enough." I looked at the message, then out the window at the sun setting over the ocean. My mother's garden, my father's bookshelves, my childhood home. The roots I had forgotten but that had never stopped sustaining me. "Yes," I whispered to myself. "Yes, it has gone far enough. But not in the way you think." Spring came early to coastal Maine that year. By mid-March, crocuses were pushing through the soil in the garden, and the air carried the promise of warmth. I had been in my parents' home for nearly 2 months, settling into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. Each morning, I helped Catherine in the garden, learning and remembering in equal measure. In the afternoons, I explored the town, rediscovering old haunts and finding new favorites, The local library had welcomed me as a volunteer, where I read to children twice a week. The bookstore owner, upon learning I was Martha Walker's daughter, insisted I join their monthly book club. "You're blooming," Elisa remarked one evening as we walked along the shore. "Just like your mother's garden." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words. The constant anxiety that had been my companion for years had receded, replaced by a quiet contentment. My hair, which I'd always colored diligently, now showed streaks of silver that I found I rather liked. The lines around my eyes seemed less like burdens and more like evidence of a life well lived. "I've been thinking about the house," I said, picking up a smooth stone and turning it over in my hand. "Your parents' house or the one back in your old city?" Elisa asked. "Both, actually. I've decided to sell the house back there." Elisa raised her eyebrows. "That's a big decision." "It is," I agreed, "but it doesn't feel like home anymore. It hasn't for a long time." "And what about this place?" I looked up at the Victorian silhouetted against the dimming sky. "I'm thinking of moving back permanently. The Coopers mentioned they've been considering downsizing. I could live in the main house and keep the cottage for guests." "Like your grandchildren," Elisa suggested. "Exactly." I thought of Tyler, who had visited for a week during his school break. Despite Raven's initial refusal, she had relented when Mason intervened, recognizing it might be the only way to eventually repair relations with me. Tyler had thrived in Maine, helping Robert with his woodworking projects and joining me for long walks on the beach. He'd left reluctantly, making me promise to let him return in the summer. "Have you spoken to Raven since Tyler's visit?" Elisa asked. "Briefly," I said. "She's still angry, but Tyler says their financial situation has stabilized somewhat. Mason secured a loan from his parents." The confrontation I'd been expecting from Raven never materialized. Instead, there had been tense phone calls, emotional manipulation, and finally, a grudging acceptance that I wouldn't be returning anytime soon. What she didn't know yet was that I wouldn't be returning at all, at least not to live. I spoke to a realtor yesterday, I continued. "The market in my neighborhood is strong. With the equity I have, I could sell the house, pay off the remainder of the mortgage, and still have a substantial sum left over." "For what?" I smiled. "For living, Elisa. For finally living my life." The next morning, I received an email from my realtor with potential listing prices for my house. The numbers were better than I'd expected. The area had become increasingly desirable, and my well-maintained home would likely sell quickly. As I sat on the cottage porch reviewing the email, my phone rang. Raven's name appeared on the screen. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hello, Raven." "Mom." Her voice was tight. "I just got a call from Nancy Wilson. She said she saw your house listed with Henderson Realty online." Word traveled fast. The listing hadn't even gone live yet, but Nancy, my nosy neighbor, had a daughter who worked at the realty office. "Yes, I'm selling the house," I confirmed. "Without discussing it with me." The familiar indignation rose in her voice. "It's my house, Raven. I don't need your permission." "But what about your life here? Your grandchildren?" "I'll always be part of their lives," I said calmly. "Tyler already has plans to spend part of his summer with me." "In Maine?" She made it sound like I was moving to the moon. "Mom, be reasonable. You can't just uproot your entire life." "Actually, I can, and I have." There was a long pause. "This is about the toast, isn't it?" she finally said. "You're still punishing me for one stupid joke." "No, Raven. This isn't about punishment. It's about me finally making choices for myself." "So you're abandoning your family?" "Nice, Mom. Really nice." The accusation stung, but I didn't rise to the bait. "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm changing the nature of our relationship to something healthier for all of us." "Healthier?" she scoffed. "How is moving hundreds of miles away healthy?" "Because, for the first time in decades, I'm happy, Raven. truly happy. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, she spoke, her voice smaller. The house is really for sale? Yes. What about our house, the one you froze the mortgage on? I had been expecting this question. I'll transfer the deed to you and Mason under one condition. What's that? Suspicion crept back into her tone. That you agree to family therapy. You, me, and Mason. We have a lot to work through if we're ever going to have a healthy relationship. Therapy? She sounded scandalized. We don't need therapy. I think we do, and it's non-negotiable. Another long pause. I'll think about it. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't an outright refusal either. Progress. After we hung up, I walked down to the main house, where Catherine was preparing beds for spring planting. She looked up as I approached, smiling. You look like a woman who's made a decision, she said, brushing soil from her gloves. Several, actually, I replied. The most important being that I'd like to buy you and Robert dinner tonight. To discuss your thoughts on selling me back my parents' house. Catherine's eyes widened, then crinkled with delight. We were hoping you might ask. This place has always been yours in spirit, Lillian. It seems right that it should be yours in deed again, too. That evening, over lobster at the local inn, we worked out the details. The Coopers would sell me the house at a fair price, taking into account the improvements they'd made over the years. They would move to a smaller place in town, but remain close enough to visit often. 2 new beginnings, Robert proposed, raising his glass. And old roots, I added, touching my glass to his. As we clinked glasses, I felt a profound sense of rightness settle over me. The path forward wasn't completely clear. There would be difficulties with Raven, complexities with the grandchildren, the logistics of moving. But for the first time in years, I was charting my own course. Not as Raven's mother or the grandchildren's babysitter, but as Lillian Walker, a woman rediscovering herself at 70. Later that night, I sat in the window seat that had been my childhood refuge, looking out at the moon reflecting on the ocean. I thought of my mother's journal and her words about giving children the confident strength to face the world. Perhaps it wasn't too late to model that strength for Raven, even now. Not through endless sacrifice, but through living authentically and setting healthy boundaries. And perhaps, in finding myself again, I might also find a new way to be a mother. Not by giving everything away, but by showing what it means to value oneself enough to create a life worth living. 1 year later, I stood in my mother's kitchen, my kitchen now, arranging freshly cut dahlias in a blue glass vase. Through the window, I could see the garden in full summer glory, the perennials my mother had planted decades ago thriving under Catherine Cooper's continued guidance. Though the Coopers had moved to their new home in town, Catherine still came, 3 times a week to help with the garden, claiming she wouldn't know what to do with herself otherwise. The sound of car tires on gravel announced the arrival I'd been both anticipating and dreading. I smoothed my linen dress, took a deep breath, and stepped onto the front porch. Raven emerged from her sleek rental car, sunglasses perched on her head, looking somewhat out of place in her designer clothes against the rustic backdrop of coastal Maine. Behind her, Mason helped Tyler and his younger sister Emma unload their bags. "Mom," Raven said, climbing the porch steps. Her greeting wasn't warm, but it lacked the hostility of our earlier encounters. "Welcome," I replied, pulling her into a light hug that she returned stiffly. "How was the drive?" "Long," she sighed. "I don't know how you do this trip regularly." "The scenery makes it worthwhile," I said, turning to greet my grandchildren, who bounded up the steps with considerably more enthusiasm. "Grandma!" Emma threw her arms around my waist. "Your house is amazing. Is that a real tire swing?" I laughed, hugging her tight. "It is, and it's been waiting all summer for you to try it." Tyler, now 15 and sporting a new growth spurt, gave me a more reserved but equally sincere hug. It's good to see you, Grandma. You too, sweetheart. I turned to Mason, who was carrying the last of the bags. Thank you for bringing them. He nodded, his expression softer than Raven's. Thanks for having us. The past year had changed us, all. My house in the city had sold quickly, and for more than asking price, providing me with financial security I'd never imagined. The mortgage on Raven and Mason's house had been transferred to their names, though their financial difficulties had forced them to downsize to a smaller home. Most significantly, we had begun the painful process of family therapy. Not as frequently as I would have liked, but enough to start breaking old patterns. I led them into the house, enjoying Emma's exclamations of delight at the window seat. Can I read here, Grandma? And Tyler's appreciation of my father's restored bookshelves. These are epic. Raven remained quiet, her eyes taking in the changes I'd made. The updated kitchen, the freshly painted walls, the new furniture mixed with cherished antiques. It's different than I remember, she finally said as we settled in the living room. With lemonade? Yes and no, I replied. I've tried to honor your grandparents' vision while making it my own. Mom seems to have found her calling, Mason commented, looking around appreciatively. The place looks fantastic. It was true. In the year since moving back, I'd discovered a passion for interior design, taking courses online and collaborating with a local designer on several projects. What had begun as a hobby was evolving into a small business, with clients seeking my blend of vintage aesthetics and modern functionality. Why don't you kids get settled in your rooms? I suggested. Tyler, you're in the blue room upstairs, and Emma, you're right next door. Then you can explore the grounds before dinner. Once they had bounded up the stairs, an uncomfortable silence fell over the adults. Raven fidgeted with her lemonade glass, avoiding my eyes. I'm glad you came, I said finally. It means a lot to me. She looked up, her expression guarded. We're trying, Mom. Like Dr. Bennett said, small steps. Dr. Bennett was our family therapist, a gentle but firm woman who had helped us navigate the aftermath of our fractured relationship. Progress had been slow and uneven, with Raven alternating between defensive resentment and grudging self-awareness. I know, I acknowledged. And I appreciate it. Mason cleared his throat. We have some news, actually. I've been offered a position with a firm in Portland. Maine? I asked, surprised. He nodded. It's a good opportunity. Smaller company, but solid. After everything that happened with the business. He trailed off, the failure of their venture still a sensitive subject. We're considering it, Raven added quickly. Nothing's decided. The implications hung in the air. They would be closer, only an hour's drive away. The grandchildren could visit regularly. Our fractured family might have a chance to heal in a way that respected new boundaries. That would be wonderful, I said carefully. If it's what you want. Raven's eyes met mine, a hint of vulnerability breaking through her composed facade. I'm not sure what I want anymore, Mom. Everything's changed so much. It was perhaps the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. That evening, we gathered around my dining table, the same table where my parents had hosted countless family meals. I'd prepared my mother's recipe for clam chowder, served with fresh bread from the local bakery. The conversation flowed more easily than I'd expected, with Tyler sharing stories from school and Emma describing her latest art projects. As I looked around at their faces in the warm glow of candlelight, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Love, caution, hope, and a quiet pride in the life I'd reclaimed. After dinner, Mason took the children for a walk along the beach while Raven helped me clear the table, an offer that would have been unthinkable a year ago. The therapy's helping, she said abruptly as she rinsed a plate. I know I don't always show it, but it is. I handed her another dish. I'm glad. Dr. Bennett says I have issues with entitlement. She laughed without humor. Apparently, I've been treating people like resources rather than, well, people. That sounds about right, I said, keeping my tone light. Raven shot me a look, then shook her head. I deserved that. It's not about deserving, Raven. It's about acknowledging patterns so we can change them. She was quiet for a moment, wiping a glass with more attention than necessary. I've been thinking about your birthday next month. My 70th birthday was approaching, a milestone I once would have dreaded, but now viewed with a sense of accomplishment. What about it? I asked. Raven set down the glass. I'd like to host a dinner for you. Nothing extravagant, just family and maybe a few of your friends from here. If that's something you'd want. The offer hung between us, tentative and laden with meaning. A year ago, her toast had shattered our relationship. Now, she was offering to celebrate me, not as a resource or an obligation, but as a person worthy of recognition. I'd like that very much, I said softly. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat on the porch swing, listening to the distant sound of waves against the shore. The house behind me was full in a way it hadn't been for decades, with children's laughter, with complicated family dynamics, with the messy reality of relationships in progress. I thought about the journey of the past year, from the shock of that cruel birthday toast to the peace I'd found in returning to my roots. The path hadn't been straight or easy. Reconciliation with Raven was still a work in progress, fraught with setbacks and old wounds. But something fundamental had shifted, not just in our relationship, but in me. I was no longer the woman who would accept a corner in a nursing home to avoid inconveniencing others. I was Lillian Walker, daughter of Martha and James, mother of Raven, grandmother of Tyler and Emma, friend of Elisa and the Coopers, designer, gardener, and resident of this coastal town where I had begun and would now continue my life's journey. DT. Next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee brewing. Unexpected, since I was usually the first one up. I found Raven in the kitchen, 2 mugs ready on the counter. I thought we could watch the sunrise, she said, a note of uncertainty in her voice. Like you used to do with Grandma Martha. I felt a rush of emotion at this small but significant gesture, this acknowledgement of family history, of connections that ran deeper than recent conflicts. I'd like that, I said, accepting the mug she offered. We walked together to the bench, overlooking the ocean, wrapped in light sweaters against the morning chill. As the sky transformed from indigo to pink to gold, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence between us, for once, wasn't charged with resentment or expectations, but with the simple recognition of shared existence, mother and daughter, watching the beginning of a new day. It wasn't perfect. We weren't healed. But in that moment, as light spread across the water, I understood something my mother had written in her journal all those years ago. True strength isn't found in control or sacrifice or even forgiveness. It's found in the courage to begin again, to turn the page and write a new chapter, not alone but alongside those who are willing to do the same.